All right, it is the top of the hour, so let us begin our webinar today. Thank you to all of you for joining us. This is the webinar for the 2023 Year in Review for State Policies Impacting CTE. We really appreciate all of you who are able to join us today. We have a really robust agenda where we should be able to share a lot of really great information for you today about some things that have been happening legislatively and through executive orders over the last year or so around the country. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be shared out both via email to all participants as well as on our YouTube page, and it will also be located on our website, careertech.org. We are joined today by a number of panelists, including a colleague of mine, Vilmer Alvarado from ACTE. Vilmer, do you want to pop in and say hey?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. I hope you all are having a great day. My name is Vilmer Alvarado. I'm the Research and Policy Associate at ACTE, and I'm happy to be here with you to share some of the trends and insights that we saw throughout the year.
Great, thanks, Vilmer. And we do have Thalea Longhurst and Becky from Utah joining us today, and I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves a little bit more fully when we get to their part of the presentation today. But a little bit about the agenda today. This webinar is really to help inform you all about the various state policies that have been enacted and passed throughout the year 2023, including some high-level policy trend areas. Every year, ACTE and Advanced CTE together collect and aggregate these state policy trends by looking at various state policy actions that are happening in each state. We review what systems are affected, what categories are impacted, and we do various tagging based on various categories and aggregate it all together through a state policy tracker. And so today we're going to share some specific examples from those various high-level trends. But then we're going to dive deep into Utah in particular and get some insights about what has happened in Utah's state policy over the past year, as well as some ways that Utah's ACTE and Utah's State Board of Education might work collaboratively together to better support learners across the state of Utah. So a little bit more about the state policies impacting CTE report that we put out each year. So I'll drop a link in the chat, and this link leads to our state policy page that you can take a look at. And if you go to that page, you can see the report from this year. It is available for download. And like as I shared, we track this throughout the year. And every year we do validate these policies by our state CTE directors in each state. When we're looking at these various state policies, we're looking at a variety of different state policy actions, including legislation, which makes up the primary body of work that goes into our state policy tracking. But this does also include budgetary actions as well. We do also look at executive orders from governors, as well as board actions that are taken by state boards of education. And then we also do have a live and sortable state policy tracker, which I do want to take a quick moment just to demonstrate for you all. That state policy tracker is available in the link that I just shared with you in the chat. And if you follow that link and click on the state policy tracker, you can see that not only do we have all the state policies available for you to look at from 2023, and that's done by clicking this 2023 button, and you can sort by state, you can sort by year. But for the first time, we have now aggregated all of the state policies that we have been collecting over the last 11 year-in reviews that we have been doing between ACTE and Advanced CTE over the last 11 years. So if you do select all, you can select all by state, and you can see that each state has been enacting various actions over the years. You can select the year in particular. You can select the system itself. You can select content tags as they're appropriate, and you can see all of the various content tags that we use when we do our state policy tracking. So you can see if you wanted to see all the governance policies from 2023, you can go through and make those filters and do that yourself. And this tool is really great because not only can you see the state policy actions for your particular state, But you can see them from other states that you might be interested in as well. You can also see various state policies from other states that you might be interested in that might be transferable to your state as well. All right, so coming back to our presentation today, I'm going to turn it over to Vilmer to dive a little bit more deeply into our policies for 2023. Vilmer, you are still muted. All right, if we look at these here, some of our top level findings for this year, we found 47 states enacted a total of 115 different policies. This is a little bit lower than in previous years. We're not particularly sure why, but we do imagine that this still has to do with some of the residuals from the amount of funding that different states got from COVID. If you're looking at the various states, Nevada and North Dakota were the states that enacted the most policies this year. And then secondary has across the 11 years that we've been tracking state policy actions, secondary was the system that utilized the most, or that was impacted the most by state CTE policy, followed closely by post-secondary and then workforce systems coming up in third. Now I'll pass it over to Vilmer.
Yeah, so when comparing this year's top categories with the ones from 2022, we can see that they're pretty similar, just with a slightly different order and with the addition of governance, which this year went from not being in the top 5 last year to finishing 4th this year. This final top 5 list demonstrates a consistent and continuous interest in the same issues across the board by policymakers, especially with the case of industry partnerships, which finished top of the list this year and last year as well, with an almost identical number of policies passed. And now we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive. In the next few slides, we'll go over some of the major wide sweeping or innovative policies enacted in each of the top policy categories. So up first is industry partnerships and work-based learning. So these are policies that aim to directly impact the structure or the potential of outcomes of a work-based learning program in each state. This year, we saw a total of 49 policies enacted across 27 states, starting with the state of Washington, which enacted HB 1658 in March of last year, which aimed to allow high school learners to earn elective credits for paid work experiences with the approval of school officials and a work-based learning sponsor. This was supposed to start in school year 23 through 24. And it also, HB 1658 also established the requirements for approval of work-based learning activities that qualify for elective credit. And then in June of 2023, Maine passed HCR 112, which established a task force to assess the current number of registered apprentices in the state, the number of businesses and organizations that participate in registered apprenticeships, and the benefits and drawbacks of employers having to designate a certain number of hours to register apprentices for construction and capital projects. The task force was also supposed to be designated with studying whether it would be beneficial to designate a certain percentage of time spent on these projects, specifically for registered apprentices. And it must also, the task force must also provide recommendations for legislation and policy changes for the upcoming 2024 legislative session. Last but not least, Oregon enacted HB 3814 in August of last year. HB 3814 amends the school code provisions concerning the daily pupil attendance calculation to mandate work-based learning programs or supervised career development experience that will now be counted toward the calculation of clock hours for school work per day.
All right, our next top policy area is data reporting and/or accountability. These are policies which are designated to integrate various data indicators into a state's accountability structure, including maybe their state or local report cards as it pertains to CTE. Policies for which the purpose is to conduct some sort of research and provide a report either back to the state legislature or back to the Board of Education. Or policies that are designed to collect, make use of labor market information, or that require new or different data to be reported or made more publicly available to statewide stakeholders. We saw that this year, 23 different states enacted 39 policies that we tagged in this data reporting and/or accountability space. So the first that we want to highlight is from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, House Bill 1258 changed the calculations for average daily membership to include learners who are enrolled in a dual credit course, and this will be reported by the Department of Education on an annual basis. And the goal of this is to determine better data reporting about how many learners are participating in dual credit opportunities. Next, out of Indiana, if you haven't followed Indiana state policy this year, definitely go check out some of Indiana's policy. They passed some pretty substantial legislation this year, including House Bill 1002, which is very substantive. But this bill, House Bill 1638, does require the transcription of work-based learning courses on a learner's high school level transcript with the purpose of helping with data reporting and accountability purposes. And then last but not least in this category, we wanted to highlight Alabama Senate Bill 176, which creates the Students' Right to Know Act of 2023. And this Right to Know Act helps learners make more informed decisions about their future careers and the pathways to get there. And that is through a requirement from the Alabama Commission on Higher Education to collect this data and create this interactive and online database for learners to use about making decisions for their future. So including CTE, apprenticeship, and high school credentials. It also requires the Workforce Development Division of the Department of Commerce to share data and information to be included in this database as well, to really make sure that there is alignment between education and the workforce.
So up next, we have funding, and these are policies that provide diverse mechanisms of monetary resources for existing policy initiatives or newly established programs for many different types of CTE learners. The funding category saw 34 policies enacted across 22 states, starting with Florida SB 175, which established the Step into Success Workforce Education and Internship Pilot Program for current and former foster youth. This program was tasked with developing a program to prepare students for independent and successful futures, including employment. Students can apply to receive $1,517 per month in financial assistance for each of the participants. And then Kansas, which established a $3,000 per year adult learner program through approved post-secondary institutions, including those programs offered through CTE. And then lastly, we have Ohio, which appropriated $400 million in increased funding for CTE, including the in-demand career tech program and the career technical construction grant program. And then moving on to governance, these are policies that have to do with the enactment or establishment of laws that amend the rules, procedures, or general workings of individual governmental offices or departments. So in 2023, we saw a total of 17 states enact 24 different policies, starting off with Idaho. So Idaho enacted House Bill 0267, which was passed in April of last year. And this bill created the Idaho Career Ready Students Program, which provides more opportunities for learners in grades 7 through 12 to experience CTE, as well as the creation of a governing council consisting of appointees from the House of Representatives, workforce, the Office of the Superintendent, and the state CTE director to determine the overall eligibility of each program. Next up, Nevada, which enacted AB 400 in June of 2023. This bill required the Commission of School Funding to review the academic progress made by learners statewide, as well as to mandate the inclusion of the number of credentials or other types of certifications that learners earn in CTE, and to include their progress upon enrolling in a vocational or technical school or an apprenticeship training program. And then lastly, Virginia, which enacted HB 555 in March of 2023. So this bill created an apprenticeship intermediary position for the state, which tasks the individual to work under the Director of Talent Development. So the intermediary would also be responsible for fostering relationships among industry partners, local education agencies, the state's talent program, as well as with connecting learners to apprenticeships, work-based learning, and other post-secondary education opportunities. Lastly, the law also modifies workers' compensation laws to include youth apprentices.
All right, and our last category that we wanted to highlight is actually around graduation requirements and improving and increasing graduation requirements, particularly at the secondary level. We saw 12 states enacting 18 policies this year that changed or adapted secondary graduation requirements, particularly as they impact CTE programs. The first that we wanted to highlight is Arkansas Senate Bill 294. Which required the Division of Elementary and Secondary Education to develop career-ready pathways as an option for earning a high school diploma. And the career pathways must include some sort of challenging academic courses and what they call modern career and technical studies, quote unquote, which are aligned with labor market need and must result in an industry credential. The law also expands on grades 6 to 8 career exploration, articulated coursework, and concurrent enrollment, so pretty expansive. And it also establishes a process to design career pathways and further develop CTE instructors through needed professional development and in-service training. The next that we wanted to highlight is out of North Dakota, and that's House Bill 1398. Which does require elementary and middle schools to offer instruction in computer science, in particular cybersecurity, and requires high schools to offer 1 unit of computer science and cybersecurity. It also modifies graduation requirements to allow computer science or cybersecurity to count as one of 3 required science units. It also provides grants of up to $300,000 to school districts, area career and technology centers, and other providers to offer these types of courses for adults with a stipend for teachers of those courses. And then last but not least, Maine House Bill 436 required cooperative agreements between school administrative units and CTE centers and regions in order to include an equivalency agreement for credit gained through a CTE program to be accepted as a core credit towards a high school diploma. And that's going to begin with the school year, with the academic school year 2025-2026. So those are the 5 areas that we wanted to highlight. A couple of key policies from But in order to see all of those policies, you do need to go through the tracker. If you look at the report does highlight some additional policies that we haven't highlighted today. So make sure you check out the report. But if you want to see the entire breadth of the policies that have been tracked throughout the course of the year, you do need to check out the full tracker online. But we also do want to highlight some predictive trends that, based on the way that policy has changed or policy has been adapted over time, we do expect to see some additional policies being enacted this year. And so we wanted to highlight a couple of those areas that we expect to see some additional policy being enacted. The first is in emerging workforce development areas. We've seen a number of career pathways being created over the past few years that are particularly connected to those areas of workforce development that are emerging or are related to a significant labor market need. So this includes increased investment in the green workforce, so impacting sustainability or energy programs, advanced manufacturing. In Ohio, there was a major investment in semiconductors. So they invested in certificates for semiconductor manufacturing, as well as automation and AI. So we do expect to see a number of these investments continue for workforce development in these particular areas over the next year. We've also seen over the past few years a number of policies that impact teacher recruitment and retention. We know this is a challenge for a number of states around the country. So we do expect to continue to see policies impacting recruitment and retention for CTE instructors, including through additions to Grow Your Own programs, incentives for recruitment, and then also changes to credentialing to encourage more industry-related CTE instructors to become instructors in the classroom. We've seen work-based learning become one of our top areas, and we do expect to see work-based learning and industry partnerships continue to be a top area moving forward into this calendar year, including through some flexibility in work-based learning credit, some policies that might impact the way that states engage with employers or that locals engage with employers, and then also how career-connected experiences can be attributed to work-based learning, as well as being given credit for that particular experience. And then finally, we do expect to see continued alignment with post-secondary education, especially through connected CTE or short-term credentialing programs, including a connection back to dual enrollment, career pathways that do connect to post-secondary, and then also additional short-term credentialing opportunities to meet workforce demand in particular sectors. I do see an anonymous question in the chat, so I'm going to reshare the link back to our state resource page. If you go to this state resource page at the link that I just dropped in the chat, you can find not only the year in review report, but also the state policy tracker. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our friends from Utah to do a deep dive into some things that have happened in Utah state policy and how both the state and local institutions need to learn from and respond to state policy. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Utah State CTE Director and Advanced CTE Board Member, Thalea Longhurst. Thalea, welcome. How are you today?
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me today. My name is Thalea Longhurst. I'm the State Director of Career and Technical Education in Utah. Our office oversees K-12 education. We have great partnerships with our higher education system office and our folks that work in that area, but my office deals directly with kindergarten through 12th grade. We are also the Perkins eligible recipient for our state, and so that gives us a good perspective of all things CTE in Utah. And I'm happy that Becky is here with me today from our Utah ACTE. You'll get to meet her in just a few minutes. I wanted to start, I don't view this as really kind of a brag, but I wanted to start talking about, start my comments with what makes Utah CTE unique and a little bit different. I consider myself to be really lucky that I came into this job over 9 years ago with a really solid foundation for career and technical education in place in Utah. And I kind of view my job as needing to make sure that we don't lose any ground and that we keep moving forward. But we have such a great foundation. And so I wanted to highlight for you some of the things that make Utah probably a little bit different than most other states. The first and probably the most important is that in Utah, career and technical education is a graduation requirement for every single high school student. There is a 1.0 credit graduation requirement for every student to take part in. So what that means to us is that every secondary school, grades 7 through 12, offers CTE. We have some state requirements in place, especially at the high school level, that those be by pathways. And in Utah, we have state approved pathways. At our office, we look at all kinds of data and structure. We work with subject matter experts, our industry partners, higher education, but we approve and determine what those career pathways are. We have approximately 35 pathways right now. In order to qualify to become a pathway in Utah, you have to demonstrate economic need, have direct connections to post-secondary, have industry credentials of value that exist along the continuum of that pathway, and multi-level content from exploration kinds of courses, concentrator level courses, completer level courses, and capstone courses. So every single high school and junior high school offers career and technical education. We do have a handful of district-owned technical centers, CTE centers, but they're owned by the district, and that's really where, at least in our larger school districts, where they put their very high-end programs. Foundation building happens at the local high school, and then for those high-end, very expensive programs, students where they have access to a tech center will often go to that tech center for those high-end classes. We also are lucky to have a 7th/8th grade requirement for a college and career awareness course that really starts that career exploration early. I would love it if we could mandate something even in elementary school, but that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. The earlier, the better, in my opinion, but we do have a formal requirement for career exploration in the middle school level. We're also really lucky in Utah in that we have very, very significant state funding for career and technical education, grades 9 through 12. It is significant. It makes a huge difference. And one of the things when we talk about state policies and things that happen during our legislative session is that we are lucky enough to generally almost always see an increase year over year in that funding. Unless we have an economic downturn, we continue to see increases to our CTE funding. We have excellent partnerships, as I mentioned, with our higher education offices and institutions, with our Department of Workforce Service. And in Utah, we have a group that now is housed under our higher ed office, used to be part of our governor's Office of Economic Development. They're known as Talent Ready Utah, and their job, really, their function for us is to act as maybe an intermediary between industry and education, both at higher ed and public ed, and really help bring us all together. And we've done some amazing work directly with industry partners around particularly aerospace manufacturing, diesel technician, all kinds of different things that we may not have been able to make it as far as fast without that Talent Ready Utah focus. We also have a regional structure in Utah that has existed for a very, very long time, and it is a very efficient and effective structure that allows for collaboration at the local level. Again, higher ed, public education, workforce services, chambers of commerce, whoever they want to bring in, they meet in every region. We have 8 regions, 41 school districts, 16 public higher education institutions, including our technical colleges. They meet on a monthly basis as CTE to plan, to talk about what's happening, where the jobs are, what's coming, what's going, and how that works. And it really has resulted in some excellent collaboration. We also, I mentioned we have 41 school districts, 16 post-secondaries. We're able to have regular statewide CTE meetings where we bring all of our local CTE leadership together 4 times a year to talk about things that are happening, to do some professional learning, to share best practices, to ask questions. And for us, it makes a really significant difference. When I meet with many of you across the country and I hear about 550 school districts in your state, I don't know how you do it. I give you my sympathies. 41 is hard to manage for me, but it is an effective way to do it for us. And then I also wanted to mention our outstanding relationship with our Utah ACTE leadership. We have a great ACTE in our state, and one of the best things, one of my favorite things that they do every year, they host a CTE Day on the Hill. We're probably, like most of you, are right in the middle of our legislative session. We only have 9 days left. I just thought I'd throw that out there, but who's counting? But they host a CTE Day on the Hill during our legislative session. And really, this is one of my favorite things. I wasn't able to attend this year, but we invite our CTSO state officers up to the Capitol from all of our organizations, and they focus on advocacy. We have a great trainer who comes in and teaches them about how to advocate for CTE, how to advocate for education. And I will, and most of you probably already know this, but I will definitely say without hesitation, the best way to advocate for CTE is to have your students do it. I can go up, our teachers can go up, we're just faces, but when those students go up, those legislators want to pay attention, want to talk to them, and want to hear from them. And it really is a very important day for us. We've been lucky enough in Utah to have concurrent enrollment for a very long time. That's statewide. It goes on transcripts. Students are able to move around from institution, school to school. It's funded by our state legislature. We, in the last 10 years since I've been in my position, been able to include college and career readiness and CTE in our school accountability formulas. And that's something that I'm very excited about and very proud of. Our ability, Dan or Vilmer mentioned this a few minutes ago, the ability to provide academic credit for some of our CTE courses. There was a state or two that had some policy implementation. We've been doing that for almost 20 years now, being able to provide, and it's a select list. It's not every CTE course, but where we can demonstrate rigorous learning in science or English or math or whatever that might be, we're able to offer academic credit. And then I mentioned our regular increases in secondary CT funding. That is a huge benefit to us. So now that you understand how we're a little bit different, really when we look at our policies and what we're looking for and what we're hoping to see come out of our legislative sessions, we also have had a focus the last few years, really since Perkins 5 was implemented, around work-based learning. As the state director, I really wanted to use Perkins 5 as a lever to really increase the rigor, the relevance, and the quality of our work-based learning in secondary programs. And so you'll see in Utah's recent policies that are passed and implemented, some things around work-based learning. One thing in particular, last year, I believe it was, we were able to get a bill, and this was done through our Talent Ready Utah office, actually. So this is an instance where our state board wasn't necessarily looking to do this, but Talent Ready Utah was able to step in, work with some legislators. Our state risk management office now covers all students, all secondary students who are doing CTE internships out in the workplace. So as long as they're working within all the laws around that, certainly not in hazardous jobs, things like that, they're covered under state risk management. So now that makes it easier for employers to sign on and say, yeah, I'm willing to take some interns because I don't have to worry about workers' comp or some of those pieces. One of the things that you'll see last year and that we're working on this year is around youth apprenticeships, where we have a grant from the Department of Labor and also working with the National Governors Association around youth apprenticeships. This year particularly, we have a bill that I believe will pass around helping us to build out the governance structure moving forward for youth apprenticeships. Also this year, well, let me go back and mention last year, our legislature approved what they call the PRIME program. And this is a scholarship opportunity for students who complete a prescribed sequence of general education courses via concurrent enrollment or complete a certain number of hours in a CTE program of study, they can qualify for a prime scholarship to go towards post-secondary education. This year, we're hoping to add completion of a youth apprenticeship as one of the methods by which they can qualify for this prime scholarship. One of the other things, I was catching up on my list of bills that I try to follow this morning even. And one of the things we're seeing a lot, this is not new to Utah, but continues to be an emphasis by our legislature, is around teacher competency rather than, but in addition to, maybe that's the better way to say it, in addition to traditional teacher preparation programs. So there is a huge movement towards teacher competency, and our office is working really hard to find ways to do that for career and technical education. I feel like I'm talking really fast. I think, Dan, the last thing you wanted me to talk about was dissemination, how we share out information about state policies and changes and updates. There's a lot of things that we do. I mentioned our statewide meetings with local CTE leadership, both secondary and post-secondary. We meet 4 times a year. We disseminate a lot of information that way. Each of our pathway and program areas hold summer professional learning opportunities where a lot of information is shared, specifically information obviously that relates to that pathway as well as just general CTE information. My staff in my office all have listservs, voluntary, but I think the majority of teachers in our system sign up for those listservs by where we share out all kinds of information. In addition, they can talk back and forth to each other. We also do a monthly CTE newsletter that anyone can subscribe to, as well as a weekly email to all of our CTE leaders where we try to share out things that are happening, important things for them to know, et cetera, et cetera. I mentioned our region planning meetings. Our office, we assign a staff member in CTE at my office as a region liaison. And so for every monthly meeting, I have a staff member who attends those regional planning meetings so that they're there to answer questions, help give some guidance, share policies. So, so that liaison role is a very, very important one. And then finally, we've talked about this and shared this information at many advanced CT meetings in the past, but we do a lot of publications. And we try to share out and tell our story. We have what we call our at a glance document, which is CT data, good or bad, high or low, it doesn't really matter. I want to share the information. How are we doing? How do we compare year over year? What is our concentrator and completer graduation rate as compared to our state graduation rate? We look at all kinds of different data points, and every year we try to reset, what's important, what are we tracking data-wise that tells the story of CTE. And not only do we do a statewide at-a-glance document, but we also then disaggregate that data down by region, our 8 planning regions, and then also by LEA. And we have a document prepared for every region and every LEA so that they can see their own data and how they're doing. And many of them are able to share out at their local board meetings that same information and use it. So it's an ongoing thing, I think, to really pay attention to what's happening. Where do people need data? I'm a big data person. I love data. How do we share that out? How do we tell the story? How do we get students to advocate? Those are really the big pieces, and I am happy to answer questions after Becky talks for a little bit.
Great, thanks so much, Thalea. Really great to hear always from the state's perspective, really to get a sense of kind of what your policy landscape is and how that really informs some of the policy changes that might be impacting your state each year. So from the state perspective, we also want to hear from the local perspective as well, because we have quite a few local practitioners on the call today as well. So we'll turn it over to Becky Cox from Utah's ACTE officers, and she can give a little bit more of an explanation about your role and a little bit more about the local implementation of state policy in Utah.
Great. Happy to be here as well. I am the co-executive director for Utah ACTE. We have a full volunteer board, and we call it an executive committee, which would be considered our staff, but everyone is volunteer here in Utah. We do not have a paid executive director at all. I have been involved in Utah ACTE for probably 30 years. I have been a classroom teacher for 35 and still teaching and loving it. And I, about 5 years ago, served as the ACTE president. On the national level, served on the board also as the ACTE vice president for family and consumer sciences. So been very involved nationally with ACTE and just love the organization and what it does for teachers and for our state associations as well. I was asked to speak a little bit about what does state level policy change mean for me at the local level. I do work for the largest school district in our state. We have a district CTE director and 2 assistant directors on our district level as well. And I had the opportunity to visit with them about this a little bit. Honestly, in the state of Utah, for 35 years of my career, I feel like we have been so well supported and well funded by our state. I feel like I'm in a state where CTE is valued and people know what it is. And I just feel like we've never really had to fight for things here. And it's just a good feeling. Even on a local level, I feel like even our own state superintendent or our school superintendent in our district, even our state superintendent as well, is very supportive of career and technical education. And it just, I think even our state legislature gets it as well. They see the value in what we do and in preparing these students for their futures and for their careers. We're very, very strong here in pushing kids to post-secondary, 4-year institutions especially. That's such a valued thing here in the culture. But I think people are beginning to understand also the value of shorter term post-secondary opportunities for students. And we're seeing that a little bit more. And it's been fun to see that happen as well. As I visited with my district CTE people, you know, from my level, I am a school coordinator. So I go to a monthly meeting with my school district. And about the only thing I've heard recently was we've heard a little bit about tightening the budget. And that stemmed from, I think this was kind of a post-COVID decision that allowed the school districts to take up to 35% of the CTE district funds as needed. And Thalea could probably even talk a little bit more about that. I think it's only happened once in the last few years in our district. But, you know, we're given a budget, we're asked to spend that budget, and sometimes that budget doesn't get spent. And sometimes there are other purposes or uses for that money that might be better served than just sitting around waiting for something else to happen. Our district works very, very closely with our CTE directors in making the decision about using that money or taking that money. But that honestly is about the only thing I've heard about in the last few years at all that has impacted us on that local level. Like I said, I just feel like we're just well taken care of. As far as Utah ACTE and how we work, like I said, we are a completely volunteer board. We do not have a paid lobbyist. And because of that, it's a little bit difficult for someone who is a full-time classroom teacher or working in a post-secondary institution or whatever to spend the time tracking all of the bills. We do rely heavily on Thalea and her team to keep us notified if there's anything that we need to take action on. And like I said, there's been little things in the past, but typically they just kind of go away before anything ever happens, which has been really nice, not to worry about. We did have a little issue with our agriculture division and some funding issues. This was several years ago. And they came to us, not asking us necessarily to do anything, but if we would support them as a division of Utah ACTE in their efforts. And we told them that we'd stand behind them and do what we could do, but they, again, were able to resolve that. So that worked out great. Thalea talked about our Day on the Hill. We just did that. That's been a fun event to see these kids learn how to engage with adults who are policymakers has been a really fun and exciting thing. I know a lot of states do that as well. We have a legislative chair on our board who's pretty well connected. She knows a lot of people on the Hill. Her brother has served in some pretty high profile positions. And so it's kind of nice to be able to call her up and say, hey, will you check with so-and-so on this, or will you check with that? So that's been a really positive thing as well. And then I couldn't speak more highly of our relationship with Thalea's office and the USBE. Thalea comes, we have quarterly board meetings for Utah ACTE. Thalea and our representative from higher education are invited to attend those meetings and to present at those meetings anything that our board needs to hear. And Thalea always shares great information and keeps us very, very well informed on any of the issues and anything that we need to be watching or taking into account by, by our board. So I think that's about all I had, actually.
Thanks, Becky. Really great to hear kind of that local perspective as well. I'm curious from your national experience, why is it important for local educators, local CTE practitioners to be aware not only of legislation that's happening in their own state, but also kind of national trends as well?
And I think that that's kind of an unfortunate thing. I think a lot of people don't really understand what's happening on the national level. And in our district, well, even probably statewide, and again, Thalea could probably talk to us a little bit better. Perkins is obviously our big thing, right? And we do get some Perkins funding, but the majority of our funding does come from our state. And so teachers don't understand the importance, I guess, of, even though the Perkins money isn't a huge amount, it's more about the message that it sends as far as the importance of career and technical education nationwide. I think it's important that that people understand that again, this should be something that our legislators are thinking about and understanding, why it is important. And I think local teachers just kind of get in their classrooms and they get their funding, things are great, close the door, don't worry about it. And I think it's important, even if you don't actively want to participate in that, I think it's important to understand where that comes from, why it matters, and how it impacts their classroom. Even if it's small and little, it still impacts them. And again, it's more that national message of CTE is important, CTE matters, and CTE does make a difference in these kids' lives.
Great, thanks, Becky. Thalea, there was a question in the Q&A about funding for charter schools in your state as it pertains to CTE. Can you share a little bit more about what the funding looks like for some of those specialized CTE centers, or how it might be a little bit more different than your traditional public school?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. Our charter schools are public schools. We have in our state board rule, it's always a trick, right? What do you put in state law versus what do you keep at a board rule sort of level? So we try to keep these things at our board level, but we have a list of requirements. What do you have to do to qualify for state funding? And then what do you have to do to maintain that funding? And any public secondary school can qualify as long as they maintain those requirements year over year, then they're eligible for funding. We have different levels of funding in some areas based on how much you do, how many students you have, those kinds of things, but it's all the same to us.
Great, and I did see one more question. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box, but I did see another question about highlighting some states that have increased their investments in CTE. When we do our tracking for funding, we do look at a plus or minus change of 5% or more. So just from a quick scan of the tracker, I can highlight a few states, but I do suggest that you go to the tracker itself. You can sort by 2023 and by funding, so you can see all of the states that have changed their funding allotments over the past year. But some specific ones, and this is not fully comprehensive, but some specific ones do include Alaska, Florida, Idaho, Kansas, Maine, Michigan, Nevada, North Dakota, Ohio, Utah, and Wyoming. So quite a few states have increased their allotments for CTE, whether that's categorical funding at the state level, whether that's some pilot programs that drive investments specifically for new CTE centers or some equipment grants or things like that. But definitely do go back to that tracker to make sure that you can look at all of those states, as well as some other states that have enacted some more specific funding initiatives. I do want to give just 15 more seconds to see if anyone has any additional questions in the Q&A before we wrap up today. All right, seeing no additional questions here, I do want to thank Thalea, Becky, and Vilmer for participating on our panel today. A wealth of information, really great to hear kind of that deep dive from Utah. A couple of things coming up from us here at Advanced CTE. We are opening applications for our post-secondary state CTE Leadership Fellowship, which seeks to find CTE leaders working in post-secondary education, industry, or workforce development for cohort 3. So if you are interested in applying for that or learning more information, you can follow this link here. And then, of course, Advanced CTE's spring meeting is coming up April 29th through May 1st. If you have particular questions about Advanced CTE's fall meeting, you can go to, or spring meeting, excuse me, you can go to the link that I just put in the chat there. And then if you have any questions about this presentation today, you can either email me at my email address here, and I will be happy to follow up with you. Or Vilmer, if you want to put your email in the chat as well, you can also follow up with Vilmer. But again, thank you all for listening to today's webinar. Again, please do read the year in review report, look at the tracker, go back to previous years, see what's happened in your state over the past decade or so. And then we will be doing another webinar similar to this, probably in August or so, to get a mid-year point of view about what's happened so far in 2024. And then, of course, we do always do a year in review report and webinar each year. So we will continue to do these presentations as we move forward into following years. So hope you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and we will see you all next time.